My wife spent the whole pregnancy saying the baby wasn't mine. So I believed her. The ultrasound technician was still wiping gel off Sarah's belly when she turned to the couple beside us in the waiting room and said, "I'm pretty sure this isn't even his baby." She laughed like it was the funniest joke in the world. I mean, look at him. Does he really seem like father material? I sat there holding her purse and the insurance cards, trying to process what I'd just heard. The other couple shifted uncomfortably and suddenly found their phones very interesting. This was supposed to be our 20-week appointment, the one where we'd find out if we were having a boy or girl. Instead, I was getting another public humiliation. "Sarah, what the hell?" I whispered. She shrugged, pulling her shirt down. "What?" "I'm just being honest, Marcus. You know I had that thing with Derek from my yoga class. The timing lines up pretty perfectly, don't you think?" The thing with Derek. She'd been mentioning the thing with Derek for 3 months now, ever since she started showing. At first, I thought she was just having pregnancy anxiety, you know, that fear some women get about whether their partner will stick around. But it wasn't anxiety. She brought it up everywhere. At her sister's birthday dinner, well, Derek has great genes, so if it's his, the baby will definitely be athletic. At the grocery store to the cashier, my husband here is convinced it's his, but honestly, I'm not so sure. To my own mother last week, Marcus is being so sweet about everything, considering there's a 50-50 chance he's raising another man's child. Each time, she'd glance at me with this little smirk, like she was testing how much I could take before I'd crack. I used to argue. I used to pull her aside and ask why she was doing this, remind her that we'd been trying to conceive for 8 months, that she'd been the one tracking ovulation and dragging me to bed at specific times. You know exactly when this baby was conceived, Sarah. We were both there. But she'd just roll her eyes. Memory's a funny thing, Marcus. And Derek is just so much more virile than you. By month 4, I stopped defending myself. By month 5, I started believing her. Why would someone lie about their own infidelity? Why would a woman deliberately plant doubt about her baby's paternity unless it was true? Sarah was a lot of things, dramatic, attention-seeking, sometimes cruel when she didn't get her way, but she wasn't stupid. If she was this confident that Derek could be the father, if she was willing to humiliate both of us in front of friends and family, then there had to be truth to it. "You know what?" I said, standing up in that waiting room. "You're probably right." Her smirk faltered for just a second. "What?" "If you're that sure it's not mine, then it's probably not mine." I handed her the insurance cards. "I'll meet you at home." I walked out of that medical office and sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching other couples come and go. Happy couples. Couples where the woman wasn't gleefully destroying her husband's reputation in public. Couples who actually wanted to be there together. That night, I called my brother Jake. "I need the name of your divorce lawyer," I said. "Jesus, Marcus. What happened?" "She's been telling everyone the baby isn't mine. 4 months now. I think it's time I listened to her." By the time Sarah hit her 3rd trimester, I'd already started separating our lives. She just didn't know it yet. The paperwork was surprisingly straightforward. Tom Kellerman, Jake's lawyer, had seen it all before, or so he claimed during our first meeting in his downtown office. "Paternity fraud cases are more common than you'd think," he said, sliding a retainer agreement across his mahogany desk. "The key is protecting your assets before the birth, not after. Once your name goes on that birth certificate, things get complicated." I signed the papers that Thursday afternoon while Sarah was at her prenatal yoga class. The same yoga class where she'd met Derek, apparently. The irony wasn't lost on me. "We'll need to move carefully," Tom explained. "File for legal separation first, citing irreconcilable differences. Don't mention the affair allegations directly, that'll just make her defensive and suspicious. Wait until after the birth for DNA testing, then we can amend the filing with fraud claims if needed." The retainer cost me $5,000. Sarah's maternity clothes had cost about the same over the past 6 months. Funny how quickly you start thinking in those terms, what she costs versus what protecting yourself costs. I started small with the changes. Switched my direct deposit to a new account at a different bank. Updated my insurance beneficiaries, removing Sarah and listing Jake as the primary contact for emergencies. I kept paying the mortgage and utilities, but I stopped picking up the random expenses, the $200 organic prenatal vitamins she insisted on, the $400 maternity photo shoot, the $800 crib she'd ordered without asking me. "Why didn't you pay the photographer?" she asked one evening in October, waving an invoice at me while I made dinner. "I figured Derek might want some input on the baby photos," I said, not looking up from chopping vegetables. "Since he's probably the father and all." She stared at me for a long moment. "I never said he was definitely the father, Marcus. I said he might be." "Right. 50-50 chance, you told my mother. Seems like something the potential father should be involved in, don't you think?" For the first time since this whole thing started, Sarah looked uncertain. "You're being ridiculous. Of course I want you in the photos." "Why?" "If there's a 50% chance I'm not the father, there's a 50% chance these photos are meaningless. I'd rather not waste the money." That weekend, she called Derek. I heard her from the kitchen, pacing around our bedroom with her voice getting higher and more frustrated. "What do you mean you can't help with baby expenses? You said you'd be there for me." "No, I know we only hooked up a few times, but..." "Derek, don't you dare hang up on me." She came downstairs 20 minutes later, red-faced and quiet. "Derek's being weird," she announced, settling heavily onto the couch. "He says he barely remembers sleeping with me. Claims it was only twice and we used protection both times." I nodded, seasoning the chicken for dinner. "Memory's a funny thing," I said, echoing her own words back to her. "Pregnancy brain affects everyone differently, I guess." "That's not. I don't have pregnancy brain, Marcus." "Then Derek's probably just scared. Big responsibility, raising a child. Some men run when things get real." She was quiet through dinner, picking at her food and glancing at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. I ate normally, complimented her on the salad she'd made, asked about her doctor's appointment the next day. Are you coming with me? She asked. Do you want me there? I mean, if Derek's the father, maybe he should be the one hearing about cervical dilation and birth plans. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. Stop saying that. Saying what? You know what. But I didn't stop. Why should I? By November, Sarah's story started changing. Suddenly, she wasn't so sure about the Derek timeline anymore. The confident smirks disappeared, replaced by nervous glances whenever I walked into a room. I've been thinking, she said one Tuesday morning while I packed my lunch for work. Maybe we should just assume the baby is yours. I mean, statistically, it probably is. I looked up from my sandwich. Statistically? Last month you told the mailman there was a good chance your husband wasn't the father. What changed? She shifted uncomfortably, one hand on her 8-month belly. I never said good chance. I said there was a chance. Small chance. Actually, you said Derek was more virile than me. That was your exact word. Virile. I was emotional. Pregnancy hormones make you say crazy things. I sealed my lunch container and grabbed my keys. Well, hormones or not, you've been pretty consistent about this for 7 months. I'm just finally listening to you. That evening, she tried a different approach. I came home to find candles lit in the living room and my favorite dinner, pot roast with those little potatoes, waiting on the table. Sarah had changed into one of her few remaining dresses that still fit, and she'd done her hair the way I used to love. I thought we could have a nice evening, she said, serving me a plate. Talk about the nursery. Baby names. You know, normal couple stuff. I sat down and cut into the roast. It was perfectly seasoned, exactly how she knew I liked it. Have you told Derek about the nursery? He might have opinions about paint colors. Her face crumpled slightly. Marcus, please. Can we have one normal dinner? This is normal for us now. You've made that pretty clear. She was quiet for a few minutes, picking at her food. Then, I called Derek again yesterday. I raised my eyebrows. Oh. How's the potential father doing? He said something weird. He said he never slept with me at all. Like, ever. He said I was making the whole thing up. I chewed slowly, considering this. That is weird. Memory problems? No, Marcus. He was really insistent. He said we've never even been alone together, that yoga class is always in groups, and he's been with his girlfriend Rachel for 2 years. He said I was scaring him. Huh. I reached for the salt. So either Derek's lying to avoid responsibility, or... I let the sentence hang there. Sarah stared at me across the table, waiting for me to finish it. Or what, Marcus? Or you've been lying for 7 months about sleeping with him. The word sat between us like a third person at the dinner table. Sarah's face went through several expressions, surprise, guilt, anger, then something that looked almost like relief. I wasn't lying, she said quietly. I was testing. Testing what? Testing whether you actually loved me. Whether you'd fight for our marriage. Whether you'd just give up the second things got complicated. I set down my fork. You've been destroying my reputation for 7 months as a test. Not destroying. Just seeing how much you cared. Other husbands would have fought harder. They would have demanded answers, gotten jealous, made me choose between them and Derek. I stared at her. Sarah, there is no Derek. You just said he told you nothing happened. But you didn't know that. You should have fought for me anyway. The pot roast suddenly tasted like cardboard. I looked at this woman I'd been married to for 4 years, really looked at her, and realized I was sitting across from a stranger. So the baby is mine. She nodded, tears starting. Of course it's yours. And you've spent 7 months telling everyone in our lives that I might be raising another man's child. Another nod. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Congratulations, Sarah. Your test worked perfectly. I walked upstairs and locked myself in our spare bedroom, the one that was supposed to become the nursery. Sarah had already painted it a soft yellow, gender neutral, with little ducks on the border. I'd helped her pick out that paint 3 weeks ago, back when I was still pretending to care. She followed me up, knocking on the door every few minutes. Marcus, please. We need to talk about this. We just did talk about it. I mean really talk. I can explain everything. I sat on the edge of the futon, staring at the duck border. 7 months. 7 months of public humiliation because my wife wanted to test whether I loved her. 7 months of friends asking careful questions and family members giving me pitying looks. 7 months of me questioning my own worth as a husband while she watched me slowly break down. My phone buzzed. Text from my mother. How did the doctor's appointment go today? Is Sarah feeling all right? Dad and I are so excited to meet our grandchild. Our grandchild. Mom had been calling it that since the pregnancy announcement, despite Sarah's constant hints that the paternity was questionable. My mother just ignored the implications, the way she always ignored unpleasant things, and kept buying baby clothes and talking about her first grandchild. Another text, this time from Sarah's sister Jenny. Sarah called me crying. Says you're being cold about the baby. Marcus, I know she said some confusing stuff lately, but pregnancy is hard. Maybe cut her some slack. Confusing stuff. That's what Jenny called 7 months of my wife telling people I might be a cuckold. Just confusing stuff. I turned off my phone and pulled out my laptop. Tom Kellerman had sent me draft separation papers last week, waiting for my approval to file. I'd been hesitating, some small part of me hoping Sarah would suddenly start acting like the woman I'd married. Instead, she'd been conducting psychological experiments on our marriage. The knocking stopped around 10 p.m. I heard Sarah moving around downstairs, then the TV turning on. Some mindless reality show she liked to watch when she was stressed. I used to join her on the couch for those shows, even though they bored me to tears. Seemed important to spend time together. Funny how quickly, together, becomes a word that hurts to think about. Around midnight, I heard her crying. Soft, muffled sobs that carried up through the floor. The old me would have gone downstairs, held her, asked what was wrong and how I could fix it. The new me, the one she created with her test, stayed exactly where I was. My laptop screen showed Tom's email, cursor blinking in the reply field. All I had to do was type approved and hit send. The papers would be filed Thursday morning. Sarah would be served at work, probably sometime after lunch when she was back from her doctor's appointment. The crying got louder. I put in headphones and opened a work presentation I needed to finish for Friday's meeting. Quarterly sales reports. Clean, simple numbers that meant exactly what they appeared to mean. No hidden tests or psychological games. No wondering if the data was lying to me for my own good. At 2 a.m., I approved the divorce papers. At 2:30 a.m., I heard Sarah throwing up in the bathroom. Pregnancy nausea, probably, though she was far enough along that morning sickness should have stopped months ago. Stress could bring it back, according to those pregnancy books she'd made me read. I didn't go check on her. She'd made it clear she could handle this pregnancy without me. Time to let her prove it. The process server found Sarah at her accounting firm the following Thursday, exactly as I'd planned. I knew her schedule, lunch at 12:30, back at her desk by 1:15, usually alone in her cubicle until at least 3 p.m. Professional, discreet, no scene in front of clients. I was in a budget meeting when my phone buzzed with her call. Then another. Then 6 more in rapid succession before my phone finally went silent. Marcus, could you focus please? My boss Janet was staring at me across the conference table. The Henderson projections. Right, sorry. I switched my phone to airplane mode and presented my quarterly numbers like nothing had happened. Like my pregnant wife wasn't sitting in her office building reading legal documents that would blow up her world. I felt weirdly calm about it, the same kind of calm you get after ripping off a band-aid. The meeting ran until 4:30. When I turned my phone back on, I had 23 missed calls, 47 text messages, and 12 voicemails. All from Sarah. I deleted them without listening. At 5:45, she was waiting in our driveway when I got home. 8.5 months pregnant, sitting on the front steps in her work clothes, holding a manila envelope. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. We need to talk, she said as I walked up the path. Actually, we don't. That's kind of the point. I pulled out my keys, but she struggled to her feet, blocking the door. Marcus, please. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. Fix what? Your 7-month psychological experiment. The part where you convinced everyone we know that I might be raising another man's baby. Which part exactly needs fixing? She held up the papers. This is insane. You can't divorce me. I'm having your baby in 3 weeks. You're having a baby. We'll sort out the rest with DNA tests after it's born. Her face went white. You still don't believe it's yours? Even after I told you about Derek, about the test. Sarah, I don't believe anything you tell me anymore. That's what happens when someone lies to you for 7 months straight. I stepped around her and unlocked the door. She followed me inside, moving awkwardly with her belly, breathing hard from the effort. I never lied to you. I told you it was a test. A test based on a lie. You pretended to have an affair to see if I'd fight for you. That's not testing, Sarah. That's manipulation. She sat heavily on the couch, still clutching the divorce papers. Other husbands would have. Other husbands. Right. I set down my briefcase and faced her. You want to know what other husbands would have done? They would have demanded a paternity test on day 1. They would have kicked you out of the house the first time you publicly humiliated them. They would have filed for divorce in month 2, not month 8. So you're saying you should have left me sooner? I'm saying I should have believed you when you told me who you really were. That stopped her cold. She sat there processing while I went to the kitchen and started making dinner. Just for one, a sandwich and some leftover soup. Simple, efficient, exactly enough. Marcus. Her voice was different now, smaller. I'm scared. I didn't answer. The baby's due in 3 weeks. I can't do this alone. You should have thought about that before you decided to test our marriage. I know. I know I was wrong. But please, can't we just postpone this until after the birth? We don't have to make any permanent decisions right now. I turned around. Sarah was holding her belly with both hands, and for the first time in months, she looked genuinely vulnerable instead of manipulative. You made a permanent decision when you spent 7 months humiliating me in public, I said. I'm just making mine now. The timer on my soup went off. 3 minutes, exactly how I liked it. Sarah went into labor on a Tuesday morning at 4:17 a.m., 3 weeks early. I know the exact time because her water broke while she was standing in our kitchen, and she immediately started timing contractions on her phone like those pregnancy apps had taught her. Marcus, she called up the stairs. It's happening. I've been sleeping in the spare room for 2 weeks now, ever since she'd been served with the divorce papers. The house had developed in strange rhythm. We moved around each other like roommates who couldn't afford to break the lease. Polite, distant, practical. I came downstairs in my pajamas to find her leaning against the counter, breathing through what was obviously a contraction. Her face was flushed and she was wearing the oversized t-shirt she'd been sleeping in, one of mine, actually, that she'd claimed months ago when her regular clothes stopped fitting. How far apart? I asked, automatically falling into the birth plan we discussed back when we were still pretending to be a team. 7 minutes. They started an hour ago, but I thought they were just Braxton Hicks until... She gestured at the puddle on the kitchen floor. I grabbed the towels from the laundry room and cleaned up the mess while she called her doctor. Dr. Martinez told her to wait until contractions were 5 minutes apart or less, then head to the hospital. Could be false labor, Sarah said after hanging up, but another contraction hit immediately and she had to grip the counter until it passed. We waited in awkward silence, timing contractions on her app. 6.5 minutes. 6 minutes. 5 minutes and 40 seconds. I need to get dressed, she said finally. Can you grab the hospital bag? The bag had been packed for 3 weeks, sitting by the front door like a small monument to all the preparations we'd made back when this was still our baby instead of just the baby. I'd helped her pack it in early February, extra clothes, toiletries, the going home outfit she'd picked out in 3 different sizes because she wasn't sure what would fit. By 6:30 a.m., we were in my car heading to Memorial Hospital. Sarah called her sister Jenny from the passenger seat. "It's time," she said when Jenny answered. "Can you meet us at the hospital?" I could hear Jenny's excited squealing through the phone. "Oh my God. Yes. Is Marcus driving? How are you feeling? Did you eat anything?" "Marcus is here," Sarah said carefully. "We're about 15 minutes out." She didn't mention the divorce papers. She didn't mention that I'd moved into the spare room or that we'd barely spoken except for logistics in 2 weeks. Just, "Marcus is here," like that explained our entire situation. At the hospital, they wheeled Sarah up to labor and delivery while I handled the insurance paperwork. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Dolores according to her name tag, smiled sympathetically as I filled out forms. "First baby?" she asked. "Yes. Exciting times. Dad's always more nervous than Mom, in my experience." I didn't correct her about the dad part. Seemed unnecessarily complicated to explain that paternity was still technically undetermined pending DNA results, despite my wife's recent confession that her affair story had been fabricated. Room 314 had 2 chairs, a fold-out couch, and a view of the parking garage. Sarah was already in a hospital gown, hooked up to monitors that tracked her contractions and the baby's heartbeat. The steady beeping filled the silence between us. "Jenny's on her way," she said. "She's bringing Mom." Sarah's mother Linda had been texting me supportive messages for months, even after the divorce papers were filed. "These things work themselves out," her last message had said. "Babies change everything. Do you want me to call your parents?" Sarah asked. My parents. Who still didn't know about the divorce filing because I hadn't figured out how to explain that their daughter-in-law had psychologically tortured me for 7 months as a test of my devotion. "Not yet," I said. Another contraction hit and Sarah grabbed the bed rails, breathing through it the way we'd learned in those birthing classes. Classes where we'd practice comfort positions and massage techniques, back when I thought I'd be her partner through this instead of just her legal husband waiting for DNA results. The contraction passed and she looked at me hopefully. Could you hold my hand? Just until Jenny gets here." I hesitated. Then I sat in a chair beside her bed and took her hand. It was smaller than I remembered, and surprisingly cold despite the warm hospital room. "Thank you," she whispered. We sat like that for 20 minutes, not talking, just breathing through contractions together while the monitors beeped steadily in the background. Jenny arrived like a hurricane at 7:15 a.m., bursting through the door with Sarah's mom Linda right behind her. Both women were carrying coffee and wearing the kind of excited expressions you see in diaper commercials. "Oh, sweetie." Linda rushed to Sarah's bedside, immediately pushing me out of the way to stroke her daughter's hair. "How are you feeling? Is the pain manageable? Should we call for an epidural?" Jenny started setting up what looked like a small command center on the windowsill, phone chargers, snacks, a tablet loaded with what she announced were calming birthing playlists. She hugged me briefly, whispering, "How are you holding up, Marcus?" like I was the one about to push a human being out of my body. I mumbled something noncommittal and retreated to the fold-out couch. Suddenly our quiet, tense room was full of female energy and excited chatter about dilation and breathing techniques. Sarah visibly relaxed with her support team there, laughing at Jenny's jokes between contractions. "I brought the good ice chips," Jenny announced, producing a thermos. "The nurse on the 3rd floor always has the best ones, small and crunchy, not those big chunks that hurt your teeth." "You researched ice chips?" Linda asked. "I researched everything. Did you know the average first labor is 12 to 14 hours? Sarah's been at it for 4 hours already, so we're probably looking at 8 to 10 more. 8 to 10 more hours." I settled deeper into the uncomfortable couch and wondered if this was what purgatory felt like, trapped in a room with your pregnant wife who'd spent months psychologically torturing you, waiting for a baby that would legally bind you to her forever regardless of how the divorce proceedings went. At 9:30, Dr. Martinez checked Sarah's progress. 4 centimeters dilated, contractions still about 5 minutes apart. "Everything looks good," she announced cheerfully. "Baby's heart rate is strong, Mom's doing great. We're probably looking at early afternoon for delivery." After the doctor left, Linda turned to me with the kind of determined expression that meant she'd been planning this conversation. "Marcus, honey, can we talk privately for a minute?" Sarah shot me a panicked look, but I followed Linda out into the hallway. She led me to a small family consultation room with uncomfortable chairs and a box of tissues on every surface. "Jenny told me about the divorce papers," she said without preamble. Of course she had. "Linda. No, let me finish. I know Sarah's been difficult lately. The things she's been saying about the baby's father, the way she's been acting, I raised that girl, Marcus. That's not who she really is." I sat down heavily. "With respect, Linda, I think this is exactly who she really is. The pregnancy didn't change her personality, it just revealed it." Linda's face crumpled slightly. "She called me crying 2 weeks ago, told me about this Derek person, said it was all made up. Some kind of test to see if you really loved her. That's what she told me too. But Marcus, you have to understand, Sarah's always been insecure in relationships. Her father and I went through a terrible divorce when she was 12. She watched me fall apart when I found out about his affair. Maybe she was just testing whether I'd do the same thing her father did." Linda nodded hopefully, like this explanation somehow made 7 months of public humiliation reasonable. I looked at this woman who'd always treated me like a son, who'd welcomed me into family dinners and holiday celebrations, who'd been genuinely excited about becoming a grandmother. "Linda, if Sarah was worried I'd leave her like her father left you, why would she spend months giving me every reason to do exactly that?" She didn't have an answer for that. We sat in uncomfortable silence until a nurse knocked on the door. "Mr. Chin. Your wife is asking for you. Contractions are getting stronger." When we got back to room 314, Sarah was gripping the bed rails through another contraction, her face red with effort. Jenny was coaching her through breathing exercises while the monitors showed the baby's heart rate spiking during each contraction. "There you are," Sarah gasped as the contraction ended. I need you to call your parents." Please. The baby should have grandparents here. I stared at her. Sarah, my parents think we're happily married. They don't know about the divorce papers or your Derek story or any of this. What exactly am I supposed to tell them? Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know. But this is their grandchild. They should be here when it's born. Another contraction hit before I could respond, and suddenly the monitor started beeping frantically. The monitor's frantic beeping brought Dr. Martinez rushing back into the room, along with two nurses I hadn't seen before. Sarah was still gripping the bed rails, but her face had gone pale and she looked confused. What's happening? Jenny asked, stepping back as the medical team surrounded Sarah's bed. Dr. Martinez was studying the monitor readout, her expression focused. Baby's heart rate dropped during that last contraction. Sarah, I need you to turn onto your left side for me. They repositioned Sarah while one nurse adjusted the monitors and another checked her foreline. The beeping slowed but didn't stop entirely. Is the baby okay? Sarah's voice was small, scared in a way I hadn't heard since this whole nightmare started. We're monitoring closely, Dr. Martinez said, which wasn't really an answer. Sometimes babies don't tolerate labor as well as we'd like. Sarah, when did you last eat? Yesterday evening. You said not to eat once labor started. And you've been having contractions for. She checked the chart. About 6 hours now. Your blood sugar might be getting low, which can affect baby's heart rate. They brought Sarah some apple juice and repositioned the monitors. Linda was holding one of Sarah's hands while Jenny held the other, both women looking terrified. I found myself standing at the foot of the bed, feeling useless and oddly protective at the same time. The baby's heart rate stabilized after 20 minutes, but Dr. Martinez didn't look entirely satisfied. I want to see how the next few contractions go, she said. If we see any more concerning dips, we might need to discuss interventions. Interventions. The word hung in the room like a threat. After the medical team left, Sarah looked directly at me for the first time all morning. Marcus, if something happens to the baby. Nothing's going to happen to the baby. But if it does. If there are complications. I need you to know that I'm sorry. About everything. About Derek and the testing and making you doubt. Another contraction cut her off, and this time the monitor's beeping stayed normal. But something had shifted in the room. The excited energy from earlier was gone, replaced by a tense focus on the machines tracking our baby's well-being. Our baby. I realized I'd been thinking those words for the past hour without questioning them. At 11:45, I finally called my parents. Marcus. Mom answered on the first ring. How are you, sweetheart? We were just talking about you and Sarah. Is everything? Mom, Sarah's in labor. We're at Memorial Hospital. The pause that followed was filled with muffled conversation as she told Dad the news. Then, oh my goodness. Today. But I thought she wasn't due for another 3 weeks. Babies come when they come, apparently. We'll be right there. Room number. Should we bring anything? How is Sarah feeling? I looked across the room at my wife, who was breathing through another contraction while her mother stroked her hair and whispered encouragement. Room 314. And Mom. There's some stuff we need to talk about when you get here. About the marriage. What kind of stuff? Just, it's complicated. We'll talk when you arrive. After I hung up, Jenny cornered me by the window. Are you really going to tell them about the divorce today? While Sarah's in labor? They're going to figure it out anyway. Better to control the narrative. Jenny shook her head. Marcus, I know Sarah screwed up. I know the Derek thing was insane and cruel. But look at her right now. She's terrified and she needs you. I did look at Sarah. She was curled on her side, one hand on her belly, talking quietly to Linda about baby names. For a moment, she looked exactly like the woman I'd fallen in love with 5 years ago, vulnerable and hopeful and completely unguarded. Then I remembered the grocery store cashier's uncomfortable expression when Sarah had loudly speculated about paternity. I remembered my mother's careful questions about how things were going. I remembered 7 months of systematic humiliation disguised as pregnancy hormones. She needed me 7 months ago, I told Jenny. When she was deciding whether to destroy our marriage for entertainment. My parents arrived at 12:30, just as Sarah's contractions were intensifying. I watched through the window as Dad helped Mom out of their silver Honda, both of them moving with the careful urgency of people who'd gotten a confusing phone call and driven 45 minutes without really understanding what they were walking into. Mom knocked softly before entering, carrying a small gift bag and wearing her brightest smile. Sarah, sweetheart, how are you feeling? She went straight to the bed, kissing Sarah's forehead the way she'd done at every holiday gathering for the past 4 years. Dad followed, shaking hands with Linda and nodding politely to Jenny, his face already showing confusion about why the room felt so tense. The baby's doing well, Sarah said, managing a weak smile. Heart rate scared us earlier, but everything's stable now. 7 centimeters dilated as of an hour ago, Dr. Martinez had announced during her last check. Things are moving along nicely. Mom settled into the chair I'd been using, immediately taking Sarah's hand. Have you picked names yet? I brought that baby blanket I've been knitting, the yellow one I showed you at Christmas. She pulled a soft yellow blanket from the gift bag, clearly handmade, with tiny white ducks embroidered along the border. The same ducks from the nursery at home. Mom had been working on this for months, probably since the day we'd announced the pregnancy. It's beautiful, Mrs. Chen, Sarah said, tears starting. The baby's going to love it. Dad caught my eye and nodded toward the hallway. Marcus, can we talk for a minute? I followed him out, leaving the women to coo over the blanket. Dad led me to the same family consultation room where Linda and I had talked earlier, closing the door behind us. Your mother's been worried about you for months, he said without preamble. Says you haven't seemed like yourself lately. Phone calls getting shorter, fewer visits. What's going on? I sat down, suddenly exhausted. Sarah and I are getting divorced, Dad. I filed papers 2 weeks ago. His face went through several expressions, surprise, disappointment, then something that looked almost like relief. The baby? Is mine. Probably. DNA test pending. Marcus, what the hell does that mean? So I told him. Everything. The Derek story, the public humiliations, the 7 months of systematic doubt planting disguised as pregnancy anxiety. Dad listened without interrupting, his expression getting darker with each detail. She told people at your wedding anniversary party that the baby might not be yours, he asked when I finished. Among other places. The grocery store, her sister's birthday dinner, my own mother. She called it a test of my commitment. Dad was quiet for a long time, processing. Finally, your mother doesn't know about any of this. Nobody knows except Sarah's family and my lawyer. I haven't figured out how to explain it without sounding insane. You don't sound insane, Marcus. You sound like a man whose wife has been psychologically abusing him. The words hit harder than I'd expected. Abuse. I'd been thinking of it as manipulation, testing, cruel games. But Dad was right. What do you call 7 months of deliberate emotional torture designed to make someone question their own worth? A nurse knocked on the door. Mr. Chen. Your wife is asking for you again. She's at 9 centimeters now. Won't be much longer. Dad and I walked back to room 314, where Sarah was in the middle of what looked like a particularly intense contraction. Mom was holding her hand while Jenny counted through breathing exercises. There you are, Sarah gasped when she saw me. I told them I needed you here for the pushing. I looked at this woman who'd spent months destroying my sense of reality, who was now asking me to help her bring our child into the world. The baby, our baby, who would be here within the hour, regardless of how broken our marriage was. I'm here, I said, taking her other hand. Because whatever Sarah had done to us, our child deserved to have both parents present for its first breath. At 1:47 p.m., Sarah started pushing. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. One moment she was breathing through contractions, the next she was bearing down with a primal intensity I'd never seen before. All the anger and hurt between us disappeared, replaced by something bigger, this raw, biological imperative that turned our broken marriage into background noise. I can see the head, Dr. Martinez announced after Sarah's third push. Lots of dark hair. Dad, do you want to see? I found myself leaning forward before I'd consciously decided to move. There, crowning between Sarah's legs, was a patch of wet, dark hair. Our baby's hair. Real, visible proof that this tiny person we'd been waiting for was almost here. One more big push, Sarah, the doctor coached. On the next contraction, give me everything you've got. Sarah's grip on my hand was crushing. I could feel her wedding ring, the one I'd slipped on her finger 4 years ago, pressing against my knuckles. She'd never taken it off, even after being served with divorce papers. Even after I'd moved into the spare room. I can't, she panted between contractions. Marcus, I can't do this anymore. Yes, you can. The words came out automatically, some deep protective instinct overriding months of resentment. You're almost done. One more push. She looked at me with exhaustion and fear, but also something else, gratitude, maybe, or relief that I was still there despite everything she put us through. The next contraction hit and Sarah pushed with everything she had. I watched our baby's head emerge completely, followed by one shoulder, then the other, and suddenly Dr. Martinez was lifting a small, slippery, screaming human being into the bright hospital lights. It's a girl, the doctor announced, and my world tilted sideways. A daughter. We had a daughter. Is she okay? Sarah was crying and laughing simultaneously, trying to see over her belly. Is she breathing? Why is she crying so much? She's perfect, Dr. Martinez said, placing the baby on Sarah's chest. Crying is exactly what we want to hear. Good strong lungs. Our daughter, I couldn't stop thinking those words, our daughter, was red and wrinkled and covered in vernix, with a shock of dark hair plastered to her head. She was also the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life. Marcus, look at her, Sarah whispered, her voice full of wonder. She's so tiny. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, the nurse announced a few minutes later. 20 inches long. Born at 1:52 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon while her parents' marriage was falling apart. Have you chosen a name? Dr. Martinez asked while the nurses cleaned and weighed our daughter. Sarah looked at me uncertainly. We discussed names months ago, back when baby conversations were still allowed between us. I'd liked Emma. Sarah had preferred Grace. We'd never reached a decision. Grace, I said, surprising myself. Her name is Grace. Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. Grace Chen. It's perfect. The nurse placed Grace in my arms for the first time, and I understood immediately why people said having children changes everything. This tiny person, my daughter, looked up at me with unfocused dark eyes, and suddenly every decision I'd made over the past months felt simultaneously completely justified and utterly insignificant. Sarah had lied to me, manipulated me, humiliated me in public for 7 months. She'd filed our marriage under psychological experiment and nearly destroyed my ability to trust another human being. But she'd also given me grace. She has your nose, Sarah said softly, watching me hold our daughter. I looked down at Grace's perfect, tiny face, then back at my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, and realized that DNA tests suddenly seemed like the least important thing in the world. Whatever happened between Sarah and me, this little girl was mine. Completely, undeniably, permanently mine. The question was, what did I do with that certainty now? The first night home with Grace was supposed to be magical. Instead, it felt like hosting a dinner party where half the guests wanted to murder the other half. Sarah's mother Linda had insisted on staying over to help with the transition. My parents had driven back to Portland but were already planning their return visit next weekend. Jenny had stocked our refrigerator with enough casseroles to feed a small army. Everyone was being aggressively helpful, tiptoeing around the massive elephant in the room. Nobody wanted to talk about the divorce papers while cooing over a newborn. Grace slept in the bassinet we'd set up in our bedroom, Sarah's bedroom now, technically, since I was still camping in the spare room. But newborns don't care about marital geography. When she woke up hungry at 2:30 a.m., her cries carried through the thin walls like a fire alarm. I was up before Sarah, padding downstairs to warm a bottle. We'd decided on formula after Grace had trouble latching, which meant feeding duty could be shared. which meant I had no excuse to stay detached. I can do it, Sarah said, appearing in the kitchen doorway in her robe. You don't have to. I want to. I tested the temperature of the formula on my wrist. Go back to sleep. You need rest. She hesitated in the doorway, watching me prepare our daughter's bottle with the efficiency we'd practiced in those new parent classes back when we were still pretending to be a team. Marcus, we need to figure out logistics. Feeding schedules, doctor's appointments, daycare enrollment. We can't keep dancing around each other forever. I picked up Grace from her bassinet, marveling again at how perfectly she fit in my arms. 5 days old and she'd already figured out that crying got results. Smart kid. What kind of logistics? I asked, settling into the nursery's rocking chair. Custody arrangements. Visitation. Child support calculations. Sarah sat on the floor beside my chair, close enough to watch Grace eat but far enough away to maintain the careful distance we'd established. Tom Kellerman called yesterday while you were at the grocery store. He wants to schedule a meeting next week to discuss modifications to the divorce filing. Grace's dark eyes focused on mine while she drank, her tiny fist wrapped around my finger with surprising strength. According to the baby books, newborns couldn't actually see clearly yet, but she seemed to be studying my face with intense concentration. What kind of modifications? Child custody provisions. Financial support structures. Division of baby-related assets. Sarah's voice was carefully neutral, like she was reading from a legal document. Apparently having an actual child changes the paperwork significantly. I thought about this while Grace finished her bottle. Custody schedules meant weekends without her. Visitation meant dropping her off at Sarah's apartment, wherever that would be once we sold the house. Child support meant reducing my daughter to a monthly payment calculation. There's something else, Sarah said quietly. I got a call from Derek yesterday. I looked up sharply. Derek called you? Apparently someone told him about the baby being born. He wanted to congratulate me. She paused, watching Grace drift back to sleep in my arms. He also wanted to make sure I wasn't planning to put his name on any birth certificate. What did you tell him? That he was never actually the father. That the whole thing was made up. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. He said he was relieved, but also that he thought I needed professional help. Suggested I talk to someone about why I'd fabricated an entire affair. Grace made a small sound in her sleep, her tiny lips moving like she was dreaming about eating. I adjusted her position, marveling at how natural this felt despite everything else falling apart around us. Do you think he's right? I asked. About the professional help. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Yes. I think Derek's right about a lot of things. I think I need to figure out why I tried to destroy the best thing in my life. She looked at Grace, then at me. Both of the best things in my life. Looking at Grace sleeping peacefully in my arms, I realized Sarah was waiting for me to respond to her admission about needing help. But before I could figure out what to say, my phone buzzed on the side table. A text from my brother Jake at 3:15 a.m. Saw the birth announcement on Facebook. Congratulations, man. Beautiful baby. How are you holding up with everything? Everything. Jake was the only person who knew the full scope of what Sarah had put me through. He'd been the one to recommend Tom Kellerman, had listened to me vent during those awful months when I was questioning my own sanity. Jake's checking in, I told Sarah, showing her the message. She winced. He probably thinks I'm a monster. He thinks you're someone who made terrible choices. There's a difference. Sarah shifted on the floor, pulling her robe tighter. Marcus, I've been thinking about what happens next. With us, I mean. And I have an idea. I waited, gently rocking Grace while she slept. What if we didn't rush the divorce? What if we tried counseling first, real counseling, not my insane testing games? For Grace's sake. The suggestion hung in the air between us. 6 weeks ago, I would have laughed at the idea. A month ago, I would have been angry that she thought counseling could fix 7 months of psychological warfare. But holding my daughter at 3 a.m. in a house that still smelled like baby powder and regret, I found myself actually considering it. Sarah, counseling requires 2 people who both want to save their marriage. I'm not sure I'm that person anymore. Her face crumpled slightly. Because of what I did to you. Because I don't know if I can trust you again. Every time you say something now, part of me wonders if it's another test. Another manipulation. Another way to see how much I'll tolerate before I break. Grace stirred in my arms, making the small grunting sounds that meant she was transitioning between sleep cycles. I stood carefully and placed her back in the bassinet, watching until her breathing settled into the deep rhythm of infant sleep. There's something else, Sarah said once I sat back down. Something I haven't told you yet. My stomach dropped. After 7 months of revelations and mind games, those words, something I haven't told you, made me want to leave the room entirely. What now, Sarah? The yoga classes. Where I supposedly met Derek. She was staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. I never actually went to yoga classes. I stared at her. What? I mean, I paid for them. I had the membership, the yoga mat, the cute workout clothes. But I only went twice, back in October. I hated it, all those perfect pregnant women talking about their birth plans and their supportive husbands. So where were you going twice a week when you said you had yoga? Sarah's voice got even quieter. Target. The Starbucks at Target on 5th Street. I'd sit there for an hour drinking overpriced coffee and making up stories about my fake affair with my fake yoga instructor. I felt something cold settle in my chest. You created an entire fictional relationship with a real person just to torture me. Not to torture you. To get your attention. To make you fight for me. She finally looked up, her eyes red with exhaustion and shame. Do you know how pathetic that sounds? I was so desperate for you to prove you loved me that I invented an affair, then sat in Target practicing my lies. Grace made a soft sound from her bassinet, and we both froze until she settled back into sleep. Sarah, that's not desperation. That's... I struggled for the right word. That's sociopathic. The word hit her like a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly. I know. I know it is. That's why I need help. Real help. But as I sat there at 3:30 a.m., looking at my week-old daughter and my wife who just confessed to months of elaborate psychological manipulation, I realized that some problems were too big for counseling to fix. Some trust, once broken, never fully heals. The custody mediation was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday, 3 weeks after Grace was born. Tom Kellerman had recommended it as a less adversarial approach than letting a judge decide our daughter's fate, but sitting in the beige conference room at Family Services, adversarial felt like an understatement. Sarah arrived with her own lawyer now, Patricia Wong, who looked like she charged $400 an hour and won most of her cases. Sarah wore a navy dress that hid how tired she still looked and carried a leather portfolio stuffed with what I assumed were character references and financial documents. Mr. Chen, Patricia said, shaking my hand with the kind of firm grip that meant business. I understand this has been a difficult situation for everyone involved. The mediator, Dr. Rebecca Hassan, spread our paperwork across the conference table like she was dealing cards. Birth certificate, divorce filing, financial statements, custody evaluation forms. Grace's entire existence reduced to bureaucratic documents. Let's start with the basics, Dr. Hassan said, adjusting her reading glasses. Both parties agree that Mr. Chen is the biological father of Grace Chen, born March 15th. Both parties want to maintain relationships with the child. The question is what that looks like practically. Sarah's lawyer leaned forward. My client is requesting primary physical custody, with Mr. Chen having visitation rights every other weekend and one evening per week. She's prepared to be flexible on holidays and school breaks. Every other weekend. I looked at Tom, who nodded for me to continue. So I'd see my daughter 4 days a month. It's a standard arrangement for fathers in divorce situations, Patricia replied smoothly. Especially given the child's young age and need for maternal bonding. Maternal bonding. I turned to Sarah, who was staring at her hands. Tell Dar Hassan about the maternal bonding you were building when you spent 7 months convincing everyone the baby wasn't mine. Dr. Hassan held up a hand. Mr. Chen, I understand there were marital issues during the pregnancy. But we're here to focus on what's best for Grace moving forward. Tom slid a folder across the table. Dr. Hassan, I think it's important you understand the specific nature of those marital issues before we discuss custody arrangements. The folder contained everything. Screenshots of Sarah's Facebook posts from December, baby daddy drama, when you're not sure who's more excited about the pregnancy, your husband or your yoga instructor face with tears of joy. Text message chains with her sister discussing the Derek situation. Even a voice recording from Sarah's own phone where she practiced her affair story before telling it to my mother. Dr. Hassan read through the documents with increasing concern. Mrs. Chen, can you help me understand this pattern of behavior during your pregnancy? Sarah finally looked up. I was testing my husband's commitment to our marriage. I wanted to see if he'd fight for me. By publicly claiming you'd had an affair with another man. I thought if Marcus really loved me, he'd get jealous. He'd demand answers. He'd make me choose between him and Derek. Sarah's voice was barely audible. Instead, he just believed me. Patricia looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. This was clearly not the version of events Sarah had shared with her lawyer. Mrs. Chen, Dr. Hassan said carefully, you're telling me you fabricated an extramarital affair, maintained that fiction for 7 months, and allowed your husband to believe he might not be the father of your child, all as a test of his devotion. When you put it like that, it sounds insane. It sounds like psychological abuse, I said quietly. Because that's what it was. Dr. Hassan set down the papers and looked between us. I'm going to recommend we postpone this mediation. Mrs. Chen, I think you need to participate in individual counseling before we can effectively discuss custody arrangements. Mr. Chen, I'd also recommend family therapy to help you both navigate co-parenting given this history. Sarah's face went white. What does that mean for Grace? It means, Tom said, that we're going to request temporary primary custody for Mr. Chen while you get the help you clearly need. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Through the window, I could see other families walking to their cars, normal families dealing with normal divorce logistics, money and houses and visitation schedules. Not psychological warfare disguised as pregnancy hormones. Patricia was furiously whispering to Sarah, but I could see the defeat in my wife's shoulders. Her elaborate test had finally produced a winner. Just not the one she'd been expecting. 2 months after the failed mediation, Sarah called me at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was feeding Grace her late-night bottle, our routine now as natural as breathing, when my phone lit up with Sarah's name. Marcus, I need to tell you something. About the pregnancy. I shifted Grace to my shoulder for burping, phone balanced between my ear and shoulder. Sarah, it's almost midnight. Grace has a doctor's appointment tomorrow and I was never actually pregnant before. The words hit me like cold water. Grace let out a small burp against my shoulder, completely oblivious to the bombshell her mother had just dropped. What does that mean, never pregnant before? I mean this was my first pregnancy. But I told you it was my second, remember? Back when we were trying to conceive. I said I'd been pregnant at 19 but miscarried. I did remember. She'd mentioned it during one of our early conversations about starting a family, used it to explain why she was so anxious about pregnancy symptoms, why she wanted to wait until the second trimester to tell people. That was a lie too. I was 19, but I was never pregnant. I wanted you to think I was experienced. That I knew what I was doing. Her voice was shaky, like she'd been crying. But Marcus, that's not the important part. Grace had fallen asleep in my arms, her tiny fist curled against my chest. I stood carefully and placed her in the crib I'd moved to my apartment, the temporary housing Tom had helped me find while the custody situation played out. Then what's the important part, Sarah? The pregnancy classes we took. At Memorial Hospital. I told the instructor about my previous pregnancy during our first session. I remembered that class, 12 couples sitting in a circle learning about breathing techniques and pain management. Sarah had been the star student, asking detailed questions and sharing what she claimed was prior experience with morning sickness and labor symptoms. The instructor, Janet Morrison, called me today. She said she's been thinking about our situation ever since Grace was born. Apparently someone told her about our divorce. I sat down in the rocking chair I bought for my apartment, identical to the one in Grace's nursery at the house. What did Janet want? To tell me she knew I was lying about the previous pregnancy. She said it was obvious from my questions, from the way I reacted to basic information. She's been teaching those classes for 15 years, she can spot a first-time mother immediately. Grace stirred in her crib, making the soft sounds that meant she was dreaming. Probably about milk and warm blankets and the simple certainty of being loved. But here's the thing, Marcus. Janet said she almost called you during the classes. Multiple times. She was worried about how I was treating you, how I'd make jokes about the baby's paternity in front of the other couples. My stomach tightened. Even the pregnancy class instructor had noticed Sarah's behavior. She said one night after class, she watched you help me to the car while I was complaining loudly about how Derek would probably be a better birth partner because he was more athletic. Janet said you looked like a man who was slowly disappearing. I closed my eyes, remembering those classes. How excited I'd been initially, how that excitement had gradually turned to dread as Sarah's jokes got more pointed in public. Why are you telling me this now, Sarah? Because Janet said something else. She said in 15 years of teaching, she's never seen someone work so hard to destroy their own happiness. And she wanted to know if I was getting help. Through the phone, I could hear Sarah crying. I started therapy, Marcus. Real therapy. Dr. Kim thinks I have something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Basically, I'm so terrified of being abandoned that I sabotage relationships before people can leave me naturally. Grace's breathing had settled into the deep rhythm of infant sleep. Safe, secure, completely trusting that someone would be there when she woke up. That's good, Sarah. I'm glad you're getting help. The thing is, Dr. Kim wants to know if you'd consider couples counseling. Not to save our marriage necessarily, but to help us co-parent Grace without me destroying everything again. I looked at my daughter sleeping peacefully, then at the divorce papers Tom had filed last week. Some damage might be too extensive for therapy to fix. But for Grace's sake, maybe it was worth trying to find out. 6 months into couples therapy with Dr. Kim, Sarah asked me a question that changed everything. Marcus, if I could go back and undo all of it, the Derek story, the public humiliation, all of it, would you want our marriage back? We were sitting in Dr. Kim's office on a Thursday afternoon. Grace was with my mother, who'd driven down from Portland specifically for our therapy sessions. 9 months old now, with Sarah's eyes and my stubborn chin, completely unaware that her parents were trying to figure out how to be in the same room without decades of resentment. That's not really the question, I said, watching Sarah fidget with her wedding ring, the one she still wore despite our divorce being finalized 3 weeks earlier. You can't undo it. The question is whether I can live with what actually happened. Dr. Kim leaned forward slightly. Marcus, you've been coming to these sessions for 6 months. Sarah's been in individual therapy for 8 months. You've both made significant progress in understanding the dynamics that led to this crisis. What would need to change for you to consider rebuilding trust? I'd been dreading this conversation since we started therapy. For months, I'd hidden behind logistics, custody schedules, co-parenting strategies, communication boundaries. Safe territory that didn't require me to examine whether I still loved the woman who'd systematically destroyed my self-worth for 7 months. Accountability, I said finally. Real accountability. Not just to me, but to everyone Sarah hurt with her lies. Sarah looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean you spent 7 months telling our friends, our families, strangers in grocery stores, that I might not be Grace's father. Those people still look at me differently. Your mother still asks careful questions about Grace's paternity. My own parents don't trust you. Dr. Kim nodded. Sarah, we've talked about making amends as part of your recovery process. I've apologized to Marcus hundreds of times. Apologizing to me isn't enough, I said. You need to tell everyone the truth. Publicly. The same way you told them the lies. Sarah went very still. You want me to post on Facebook that I made up the Derek story? I want you to own what you did. Completely. The way you owned the lies when you were telling them. Dr. Kim made a note in her file. Sarah, how does that request feel to you? Terrifying. Humiliating. Sarah was crying now, but quietly. Everyone will know I'm crazy. That I destroyed my marriage for no reason. You destroyed our marriage for a reason, I corrected. A terrible reason, but a reason. Dr. Kim says you were testing whether I'd abandon you. Well, congratulations, you got your answer. The room fell silent except for the white noise machine Dr. Kim used to mask conversations in the hallway. But here's what I've figured out in therapy, I continued. Grace deserves better than parents who can't trust each other. And maybe, I deserved better than a wife who thought psychological warfare was a reasonable way to express insecurity. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. You did deserve better. You deserved so much better. So if you want to try rebuilding something, not our marriage, that's over, but maybe a friendship, a partnership for Grace's sake, then you need to fix what you broke. All of it. 3 weeks later, Sarah posted a 1,200-word Facebook confession. She tagged everyone who'd heard her Derek stories. She explained the rejection sensitivity dysphoria, the therapy, the elaborate lies she constructed. She apologized specifically to my parents, to her own family, to the grocery store cashier who'd looked so uncomfortable that day in November. Most importantly, she told the truth about Grace. About me. About what kind of father I'd been from the moment our daughter was born. I wasn't ready to remarry Sarah. Maybe I never would be. But watching her take responsibility for the destruction she'd caused, seeing her fight for Grace's right to have parents who could coexist peacefully, that was enough. Grace deserved better than our broken marriage. But maybe, with enough work, she could have something even more valuable, 2 parents who'd learned how to be honest with each other.